You say you want power, but let me ask you something. Are you sure? Because real power isn't pretty. It doesn't feel like victory or glory. It feels like blood on your hands, silence in your heart, and the weight of every decision you can never take back. Everyone thinks they want control over their life, over others, over destiny itself. But few are willing to face the truth Machiavelli understood centuries ago, that to truly gain power, you must confront the darkest parts of yourself. And most people are not ready for that. Machiavelli wasn't writing fairy tales. He was writing about survival, in a world where kindness gets eaten and honesty gets punished. He saw how good men were crushed because they refused to play the game, and how ruthless men rose, not because they were smarter, but because they understood the rules no one talks about. He wrote The Prince not to glorify manipulation, but to reveal what those in power already knew, that morality and power are often enemies. A man who strives to be good all the time, Machiavelli warned, is bound to come to ruin among the great number who are not good. It's a truth that still burns today, maybe even more now than in his time. Because while the world preaches compassion and virtue, it rewards strategy, composure, and dominance. It's the quiet ones who understand human nature, not the loud ones who deny it, who shape the course of history. Let's be honest, you already know this on some level. You've seen it play out in your own life. The coworker who gets promoted not because they work harder, but because they know how to appear indispensable. The person who wins love, not because they're the most loyal, but because they understand desire, the tension between absence and attention. The politician who lies with charm, while the honest man stumbles over truth. You've watched it happen, and each time you've probably felt something inside you whisper, maybe goodness alone isn't enough. That whisper, that uncomfortable truth you don't want to believe, that's what Machiavelli turned into philosophy. Power isn't about dominance, it's about understanding what moves people and using it consciously. Machiavelli saw the human soul as a battlefield of contradictions. We crave freedom, but we submit to authority. We admire honesty, but we reward confidence. We claim to love truth, but we follow whoever tells us the most beautiful lie. That's why power isn't just political, it's psychological. It begins the moment you stop reacting like everyone else, the moment you stop assuming people are rational, the moment you start seeing their actions not as good or bad, but as predictable responses to fear, desire, and insecurity. That's when you begin to wake up. But here's the part no one tells you. Once you see human nature clearly, you can never unsee it. You'll begin to notice how every act of kindness hides a trace of self-interest, how every declaration of love carries a hint of control, how every public virtue conceals a private strategy, and that realization can break you or free you. Machiavelli called it virtue, not moral virtue, but force of character, the ability to face the world as it is, not as you wish it to be, and still act decisively. That's the beginning of true power, but it comes with a price: innocence. When Machiavelli was exiled from Florence, he lost everything: status, wealth, reputation. He could have begged for mercy. He could have played the victim. Instead, he studied human nature. He watched. He listened. He wrote. He turned humiliation into insight, pain into strategy. He realized that the most dangerous people are not the ones who control others, but the ones who can control themselves. Because self-control is the foundation of all external power. You can't influence others if you can't master your own impulses. You can't command respect if you constantly seek validation. You can't lead anyone if you can't lead yourself through fear, uncertainty, and rejection. And yet, that's where most people fail. They crave influence, but they're addicted to reaction. You can see it everywhere. People today are enslaved by outrage, envy, and emotion. They hand away their power every time they get triggered, every time they need approval, every time they expose their weakness to those waiting to exploit it. Machiavelli would call this madness, because to him, the essence of power was composure, the ability to remain steady while others drown in their own chaos. It's not about being heartless, it's about being disciplined. You must learn when to show emotion and when to hide it, when to strike and when to stay still, when to appear weak, to draw strength from the illusion. That's not deception. That's survival. You want to know what makes a person powerful? It's not their money, their intelligence, or even their courage. It's their detachment, the ability to stay unshaken when insulted, to be calm when challenged, to be silent when provoked. Because when you don't react, you expose others' weakness, not your own. That's the dark art Machiavelli understood, that control over others begins with control over yourself. He wrote, "A wise ruler ought never to keep faith when by doing so it would be against his interests." And again, this wasn't a call to deceit. It was a call to realism, to stop expecting others to live by your principles and start acting with awareness of theirs. But there's a paradox here. The more you understand power, the more dangerous it becomes. Because once you know how people work, their fears, their weaknesses, their desires, you face a choice. Do you use that knowledge to manipulate or to protect? That's where most fail. They gain insight, but not wisdom. They see the game, and instead of transcending it, they become consumed by it. Machiavelli's true wisdom wasn't in teaching people how to manipulate, but in warning them of what happens when power consumes the soul. Because once you start treating every person as a tool, you eventually lose the ability to see anyone as real. And that's when you become the very thing you once feared. Machiavelli wrote about princes and kings, but his words were always about something deeper, the human heart. Every one of us carries a potential for greatness, but also for cruelty. To be powerful, you must face both, the light and the shadow, because power without compassion becomes tyranny, and compassion without strength becomes helplessness. The balance between them, that's where true mastery lies. To be ruthless in your discipline, but merciful in your intent. To see the game clearly, but not lose your soul in playing it. That is the final test of power. You say you want power, to lead, to win, to influence. But the question isn't whether you can gain it, it's whether you can carry it. Because real power isolates you. It demands that you act against your emotions, against the comfort of being liked, against the illusion of safety. It requires you to stand alone, calm, calculating, and self-assured, while others crumble. That's why Machiavelli's lessons feel dark, because they force you to see what you'd rather deny. That morality, by itself, won't protect you. That empathy without strategy gets crushed. That freedom without discipline leads to ruin. You are not ready for this kind of power. Not until you've made peace with the part of yourself capable of using it. So remember this. Power doesn't begin when others fear you. It begins when you no longer fear yourself. When you can look into your own darkness and not flinch. When you can act with strategy without losing your soul. When you can be kind, not because you must, but because you choose to. That's the kind of power Machiavelli respected. Not domination, not cruelty, but mastery. The power to shape the world without being shaped by it. The power that makes you untouchable, because you've already conquered the hardest enemy of all, yourself. The lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. One must therefore be both. Niccolo Machiavelli.